12 years ago, the Atlantic swallowed the Blackwood heiress and a 50-carat fortune. Today, she walked back through the iron gates. But in a house ruled by a bitter cousin, guarded by a grieving sister, and watched by a childhood friend, the miracle of her return is a death sentence. Someone in these halls is lying. Someone is poisoning the memory of the dead. And as the heart of the North Diamond remains missing, the real question isn't who is she? It's who wants her to stay a ghost. In the isolated reaches of the English coast, where the Atlantic crashes against jagged limestone cliffs with a fury that feels personal, there is an old saying: the sea never keeps what it steals forever. But for the residents of Blackwood Hall, it seemed the ocean had made a grim, permanent exception. For 12 long years, the clocks in this ancient manor haven't just marked the passage of hours, they have marked the slow, agonizing decay of a dynasty that once ruled the industrial North with an iron hand. It all began on a freezing October night in 1914. The great storm was so violent that the local legends claimed the devil himself was walking the waves. It was on that night that Lady Eleanor Blackwood, the golden heir, the pride of her father, vanished. One moment she was a silhouette against the lightning on the cliffs, her white dress whipping in the gale like a flag of surrender, and the next, she was a ghost, swallowed by the gray, churning abyss of the Atlantic. The search lasted weeks, but the waves yielded nothing but broken timber and the bitter taste of salt. But the ocean took more than just a life that night. Along with Eleanor, the family's crown jewel, the legendary Heart of the North Diamond, disappeared into the depths. It was a 50-carat masterpiece of nature, a stone so pure it was said to glow with its own internal light, even in the deepest darkness. The diamond was not just a piece of jewelry, it was the bedrock of the Blackwood fortune, the very soul of their unshakable power. The scandal that followed was perhaps more destructive to the family name than the storm itself. The whispers in the village grew into a roar of suspicion that echoed through the decades. Was Eleanor a tragic victim of the elements, or was she a cold-blooded opportunist who had orchestrated her own death to flee with the family's greatest treasure? For 12 years, the Blackwood name was synonymous with betrayal. The missing stone wasn't just a loss of wealth, it was a loss of honor. Every member of the bloodline felt the phantom pain of that missing diamond, a stain on their coat of arms that no amount of mourning could wash away. Lord Blackwood, once a titan of industry whose word was law from London to the coast, collapsed under the weight of the shame. His sight failed him shortly after the tragedy, as if his eyes refused to see a world that didn't contain his daughter. He became a prisoner in his own library, sitting by the window day after day, listening to the rhythmic beat of the tide, waiting for a miracle that everyone else called a lie. The manor, once full of laughter and light, became a mausoleum of dust. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret, and every creak of the floorboards echoed with the names of the lost. Lord Blackwood lived in a world of absolute darkness, where the only thing he could still see clearly was the face of the daughter the world had branded a thief. He was a man waiting for a ghost to come home, holding on to a hope that felt as fragile as old, yellowed parchment. He would often reach out his hand into the empty air, as if expecting her to take it, but there was only the cold, salty wind of the coast, whispering of secrets and loss. In the vacuum of leadership, the cousin, Julian, rose to claim the ruins of the Blackwood legacy. Legally, Julian was an outsider, a nephew with no right to the land as long as a direct Blackwood daughter breathed. But with Eleanor gone and the father incapacitated by his sorrow, Julian took control. He ruled the finances with an iron fist, acting as the de facto master of the house. He felt that as a man, the estate should have been his birthright, a right he believed was stolen by a legal system that favored daughters. To Julian, Eleanor was more than a cousin. She was a traitor who had bankrupted his future. He made no secret of his disdain, and the servants lived in constant fear of his cold, calculating eyes. He controlled the keys, the money, and the very air the family breathed. Every decision he made was sharp, efficient, and devoid of the warmth that once defined the house. He paced the halls like a predator who had finally cornered his prey, waiting for the old man to fade so he could finally secure his borrowed throne. In total contrast was Lydia, the younger sister. The world called her the Saint of the Mist. Lydia had sacrificed everything, her youth, her beauty, and her dreams, to remain by her father's side. She was his eyes, his voice, and his only comfort. While Julian was feared for his coldness, Lydia was adored for her incredible sincerity. She navigated the darkness of the house with a quiet dignity, a beacon of loyalty in a house built on secrets. Everyone believed that if the Blackwood name had any shred of honor left, it was because Lydia carried it on her shoulders. She was the perfect sister, the perfect daughter, a girl who asked for nothing and gave everything. Her presence was a balm to the father's soul, and even the sternest lawyers were moved by her devotion. She was the embodiment of selfless love, the only thing that kept the manor from collapsing under the weight of its own dark history. The fragile peace shattered when a woman appeared at the gates. She called herself Anna. Julian's reception was a masterclass in calculated hostility, but for Dr. Mark Vance, the arrival was a physical blow. Mark, the family's physician and Eleanor's childhood friend, had spent a decade trying to bury his feelings for Eleanor. When he saw Anna, his world spun. She had the same tilt of the head, the same way of biting her lip when nervous. Reason told him she was an imposter, but his heart screamed that the impossible had happened. Every time their eyes met, Mark felt a jolt of electricity, a mixture of agonizing hope and paralyzing fear. He watched her from the shadows, his scientific mind fighting against the desperate longing in his chest. He wanted to believe she was his Eleanor, but the fear of being deceived kept him at a distance, watching her with a longing that was almost painful. Despite his caution, Mark found himself drawn to her as if pulled by an invisible tide. He found Anna in the marble garden one evening, sitting by the same white roses Eleanor had once loved. The way she touched the petals was so familiar it made Mark's breath catch in his throat. "They were always her favorites," he said softly, stepping into the moonlight. Anna looked up, and for a pregnant moment, the 12 years of separation simply vanished. The connection between them was electric, a silent understanding that transcended memory. They spoke for hours about the secret paths through the cliffs and the way the fog tasted of salt. Mark felt the barriers around his heart finally dissolving. He wasn't just a doctor anymore. He was a man falling in love with a woman who felt more real than any ghost. He promised to protect her, unaware that his devotion was being watched. Lydia was the only one who embraced Anna, whispering that her heart had always known the truth. She became Anna's only ally, her shadow, and her shield. Lydia stayed by her side during the long nights, protecting her from Julian's threats. "You must be careful, sister," Lydia would whisper in the dark. "Julian is a desperate man. He will drive you mad if you don't stay by your guard." And then, she would turn to Mark, her eyes filled with false tears. "Mark, you must protect her. Julian is mortgaging the estate. He will kill her to keep his secrets. Do not trust the tea he brings. Do not trust him." Shortly after, the accidents began. A loose carpet on the landing. Childhood toys found broken on Anna's bed. Mark saw in Lydia a sister's desperate love, and he trusted her implicitly. He was convinced that together, they would save Eleanor from the wolf in the study, never suspecting that the hand guiding them was the one they trusted most. Driven by his desire to protect Anna, Mark followed Julian to a desolate tavern. He saw a heavy envelope change hands and was certain he was witnessing a payment to an assassin. But when Mark confronted the contact after Julian left, the truth shattered his world. It wasn't an assassin, it was a private investigator from Paris. The envelope contained 12 years of receipts. Julian had spent every penny trying to find Eleanor. His aggression wasn't greed. It was the trauma of a man who had been scammed a dozen times. If Julian was innocent, Mark realized with terror, then the poison in the father's tea and the accidents only had one source. The mask of the saint finally dissolved. Lydia wasn't the victim. She was the architect of the entire tragedy. Mark rushed back to the manor, realizing he had been helping the very person who was trying to kill them all. The finale unfolded in the library. As the lawyers prepared to transfer the estate to Lydia, Mark burst in with the receipts. He revealed the truth about Julian's search and the poison in the tea. Lydia's face transformed, her eyes filling with a cold, sharp envy. "You were the son, Eleanor," she whispered. "I just wanted to see what happens when the sun goes down." But Eleanor had one final card. She pulled the Heart of the North diamond from the secret stitch of her old riding habit, the one Lydia kept as a relic. Lydia had hidden it to frame her sister as a thief, but the stone became the proof of Eleanor's return. Justice was absolute. Blackwood Hall slowly came back to life. Without the poison, the father's mind cleared, and his first act was to take his rightful daughter's hand. Eleanor and Mark stood on the terrace, knowing the truth had finally won. Lydia's fall was absolute. She was led away in handcuffs, her saintly facade shattered forever. She was stripped of the Blackwood name and sentenced for the attempted murder of her father and the theft of the family diamond. In the end, Lydia got exactly what she wanted: absolute silence. Blackwood Hall breathed again. Julian and Eleanor stood on the terrace, the bitterness of 12 years replaced by a quiet understanding. "I never stopped looking for you," Julian whispered. Mark and Eleanor looked at the sunrise, knowing that Angel's shadow was gone. Sincerity had outlasted the darkness, and for the first time in a decade, the lights in the manor stayed on all night. The long storm was over, and the true heirs were finally home. The manor was no longer a place of ghosts, but a sanctuary of truth and a love that had outlasted the storm.